Welcome to the panel discussion of The Checklist, the official newspaper of the United National Congress. I'm very pleased today to have two guests, attorneys at law, Mr. Robin Montano, attorney and former senator with many years experience and from a very distinguished political family involved in the political and social and economic life of this country for decades and decades. And also Mr. Brian Baig, who has served in the Senate on many occasions and is the legal advisor to the UNC National Executive. Welcome, gentlemen.
Well, thank you very much, Kurt. I appreciate the invitation.
Good afternoon again, Dr. Mayhew. It was a pleasure to be here again with you. And again, it's an honor to be in the same presence with Mr. Montano.
Well, I don't know about honor, but you're too kind. Thank you very much.
The honor is mine, sir.
Today, we're going to be discussing constitutional issues and the government's role in them. There are many issues that the government has thrown the country into in terms of the Constitution. And although we have discussed them separately on many occasions, this is, I think, an important opportunity for us to look at it squarely. So I want to really get straight into it with the panel, and I'll ask a question for both of you to answer, but we'll start with Ms. Montano first. And the question would be, what do you think are the most important constitutional issues that's facing the country right now? And what is your view of the government's role in it? Well, I will hand the floor to you first.
Yeah, that's a good question. And the answer in one word is race. That's the question. That is, race is splitting the country. And the only way we can deal with it is to find a constitutional way that will stop this split. For example, if you're Black or African, you are going to vote PNM. In fact, it is the unusual Black or African who votes UNC or anybody else other than PNM. The vice versa is also true. If you're Indian, you're going to vote UNC. And again, it is most unusual to find an Indian who will vote PNM willingly. There are exceptions to the rule, as there always are. But what we need is that we need a constitutional system that will do away with this split. I have an idea, but it's not original, and it's not necessarily the only way to do it. However, what we must recognize is that the country is hopelessly and helplessly divided, more or less equally. And unless we do something about it, the split is going to get worse and worse and worse. We will have to deal with those damned N's or those damned C's, as the case may be. And that is not good. So what I want to deal with this afternoon is I want to deal with the issue of race. And I want to see if we can agree on a way forward to find a constitutional way that will eliminate race. Now, as I said, I have an idea. And the idea is basically that we revamp the Constitution completely. Let me put it to you in several ways. One way is, if I gave you a blank sheet of paper and told you to write a brand new constitution for Trinidad and Tobago, would you put the same constitution in place? The short answer is no. Everybody that I talk to will say, no, we have to do something different. Of course, people have various ideas. One person will favor this, another person will favor that, and so on. The other thing is this. do you realize that we've got 1.5 more or less million people? Now, you realize the size of Trinidad and Tobago is smaller than the size of Miami. The mayor of Miami, for crying out loud, presides over a larger land area and more people than does the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. Yet the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, whoever he or she might be, is the Prime Minister. I'm head of a thing. But the mayor of Miami, for crying out loud, I'm only using Miami, pick any other major town in the world, and you will find that you will agree with me. It's bigger and has more people, but yet we have in Little Trinidad and Tobago 1 million city councils, regional councils, district councils. We even have a Tobago House of Assembly. Why? Why? No, I understand that Tobago will say that they're a special case and they need to be run differently and so on. I am saying that is rubbish. They don't need to be run differently. So what would I do? Well, for example, I would take the 41 constituencies and I divide them in two. So we now have 82 seats. And I would make that the lower house, the House of Representatives, the Congress, whatever you want to call it. Let's call it the House of Representatives. I would have 82 representatives, one for each of the 82 seats. In other words, each constituency as they exist now would now have 2 representatives. Tobago, therefore, would have 4 reps. Then I would have 1 senator from each of the 41 seats. Now, all the representatives and senators would be full-time, and the representatives would have to take over a lot of the work that the local government does. They can be responsible, for example, for the cleaning, of the drains, the lights, and everything else, and the potholes. Now, I would make the representatives, they will serve a fixed term for 2 years only. Now, 2 years is a very short time. That will mean that I am a staunch PNM, UNC, ABC, LMNOP, whatever. And my representative of the LMNOP party or the ABC party, whatever it is, has been a total waste of time. So I'm now going to vote for the ABC candidate because it's only 2 years, and at the end of 2 years, my party will change this idiot who we have in the LMNOP, and I can now put back who I want, because it's only 2 years. But 2 years is too short a time to get things done properly. So I would do as the United States. I would have a senator will serve for a term of 6 years, but 1/3 of the Senate will face elections every 2 years. So we now have so some idiot senator comes up with the idea of all men must wear green pants. And I am another senator, so I like the idea all men must wear green pants. But you, Kirk, the proponent of this green pants law, if I can call it that, and you are roundly defeated because of green pants at the elections. You think I am going to be so stupid as to keep on going on about green pants? I'm going to distance myself far from green pants as I possibly can. So the electorate now has more power. And the name of the game is to give more power to the electorate, thus eliminating the need for voting Black or voting Indian, as the case may be.
So clarify for me in what way you think that system will lessen the racial polarization?
Well, for one thing, the constituencies would now be much smaller. So instead of 25,000 people, you'll only have 12,500 people in a constituency. And what will happen, at first, the racial voting will persist. But when people realize that I'm an idiot and I am a PNM or UNC, as the case may be, they're going to vote me out because I am downstairs and I only have 2 years. So when I don't perform, because remember, I have to make sure that you have got lights, you have got your potholes fixed, you are getting water, and you have to do all of these things and get these things done in 2 years. I might give you another 2 years, but at the end of 4 years, you're going to come and tell me, no, Montano, out, get out. I don't care. I'm going to vote for the other party and let me see what he can do for me. Because let me tell you something, there's only one reason for politics. There's only one reason for government, and that is to make life better for the people. There is no other reason. Yeah. And what we have now a system where neither party makes life better for the people. It really is, life becomes better for you if you're a big financier of X party, whichever party X is, and you have everybody disagreeing and hurling insults at one another and all the rest of it. There's plenty of opportunities for ball, because I have 5 years and I don't really have to perform except in the last year because people's memories are short. In any case, you are not going to vote for me because I am with those damned N's or C's, as the case may be, or you are going to vote for me because I'm with the N's or C's, as the case may be. You understand? I'm speaking very generally.
Okay. Let me bring in Brian at this point. I mean, I as someone myself who has written a lot on the Constitution, there's a lot I would like to discuss with that, but I want to bring in Brian to answer the question that I had originally asked, which is what are the main constitutional issues. But obviously, since Robin has brought in a huge provocative suggestion, radical suggestion, you may want to immediately comment on that. You can take it as you wish. But I would, because later on I would ask both of you to comment on each other's answers. Well, so Brian.
Well, again, good afternoon again to yourself and as well as to Mr. Montano. Right now in the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, I think two of our most major burning constitutional issues in the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago is especially one, the dealing of the Police Service Commission, with that of where we had the issue of the commission having names of persons to be the commissioner, and where there was a literal interference with the Prime Minister, and that is a constitutional breaches there. I think the second thing that we have to see, which deals with a lot of interference with our Constitution, is where we have an Attorney General who then would have been Faris Arawi, interfered with the process of dealing with legislation, wherein which he looked to have the Chief Parliamentary Counsel be put on suspension by means of the Judicial Legal Services Commission acting upon him because he didn't want to carry out an instruction of the Attorney General. And I think those are the two most major issues for me that is burning in the Constitution. And I'm also saying that we are also seeing which has been raised its ugly head by the leader of the opposition, is where we have the breach of a fundamental right in our Constitution, which is the right to privacy, where we are seeing where a government has literally showed some form of admittance to the tapping, listening, and even recording of persons' phone calls, checking messages, as well as emails. And last time I checked, a person has the right to privacy unless you are some form of criminal. And from hearing someone saying, well, I know we were getting too much more, where he's saying, well, we're only going after criminals. But we have seen in the past, and where we are seeing it now repeating itself, that it wasn't criminals that were being, checked, tapped, recorded, reviewed. It was not criminals, but persons in public life and persons who would hold certain positions in society. So if out of those two plus that one, I think is what we have as constitutional issues that needs to be dealt with in our country. Coming to what Mr. Montano was saying,
yeah, let me actually combine it for you to address it in it, because it appears to me that the common thread, certainly in the Police Service Commission issue, in the Faris al-Rawi issue, and the spying issue, is an abuse of power. So yes. I think that's probably the common thread. It's an abuse of power, a lack of check, and so forth. So in that context, do you think that the proposals by Robin Montano would address what you are seeing as issues right now?
More than likely it might, right? Especially with the issue he raised with race relations. I believe, you see, the constitution of a country is the benchmark of dealing with laws in a country. Because the constitution is the main lawmaking document. Whereas that is why when a constitution is formed, it is Act 1 of 1. I'm open to be corrected by Mr. Montano, learned senior. And that document, the constitution, stands fast as the bedrock document that any law that is also coming forward, it must not infringe on the constitution. Because if it infringes on the
let me help you here a minute, Brian.
Sure.
Yeah. We tend to get carried away with all kinds of things and so on. What is a law? The basic definition of a law is a set of rules on a particular subject by which a society agrees to be bound. For example, this society has all agreed to be bound by driving on the left-hand side of the road for all kinds of reasons, which are all irrelevant to this conversation. But a constitution is simply the governing law or rule by which our society agrees to be bound by. Now, the question that I have raised is this, and let me put it to you like this, because I happen to agree with you about all the things you're saying about the Police Service Commission and everything else. I agree 100% with you. But as I see it, it all flows from a fundamental flaw in the Constitution, which is that the Constitution is set up for one race or the other to dominate the other. And what I'm trying to do now is I'm trying to set up a system whereby instead of being an Indian or an African, as the case may be, we all become Trinidadians or Tobagonians or Trinbagonians, whatever you want to call it. But I would like to see, and I said a little earlier, why do we have so many district councils and city councils and village councils and everything else? We really need to streamline things, and we really need to put people in such a position whereby they feel that they have the power. Incidentally, I forgot to mention that I would have an American-type president who faced elections once every 4 years. Now, a lot of people will be surprised to learn, but it happens to be true, that an American president has less power in his country than a Trinidadian prime minister has. A Trinidadian prime minister under our constitution is God Almighty for 5 years. Now, the American president is one, if not the most powerful man in the world. He's one of the most powerful people in the world because his country is rich and powerful. But he is limited by his constitution as to what he can or cannot do. Now, all that I'm hearing you saying about the police service commissioner and other things is basically that we need, and the attorneys general, we need to have systems in place whereby these people will have checks and balance, real checks and real balances on them, because there are none. Isn't that what you're saying? Or put it another way, isn't what you're saying is that the checks and balances are too few and far between, and in any case, difficult to enforce?
Brian?
Your turn.
Well, I would agree with what Mr. Montano is saying. I think once the Constitution is amended in a way that can put everybody to have some form of say in legislation or in governance, then maybe the race relations in Trinidad and Tobago will become better. Where in that it is a Trinidad and Tobagonian style way of running things, and that may be the best. That may be what could be said to be in a perfect world, to say it in that way.
I wanted to challenge you, Robin, in the sense that about the racial nature. Now, in every society, you will find Catholics vote for one party, or Jews vote for another, or blacks, or the working class.
That is true, and the Hindus will vote this way, the Muslims will vote that.
That's right. So every party in every country has a sociological element to it, right? And there are other things. Then there are floaters and all that. And because I've often had this discussion with people outside. So of course, more Indo-Trinidadians, and particularly Hindus, do vote for the UNC, and more Afro-Trinidadians do vote for the PNM. And this is an observational truth. However, I don't think it's necessarily, it's not because either party necessarily, well, I won't say either party, because unfortunately, I do see the PNM very much push racial narratives, right? But
they do.
Yes, they do. But it's not
two parties. The PNM is more guilty than the other. But that doesn't mean to say that the other party is innocent.
But on the other hand, it's not like a country like, let's say, in Fiji or Malaysia or other countries where the platform, for example, like in Fiji, the Fijian Nationalist Party will say, no Indian can be a prime minister, and they put that in the constitution. You understand? Or that in Sri Lanka, the Buddhist party says, this is a Buddhist country, and Buddhism shall be the state religion, right? So we don't have parties that are organized, like in other places of the world, to say that this should be a black state or this should be a Hindu state. And if any party ever said that in Trinidad, that would be political suicide, as I think you would agree. Nobody would ever come. It is not legitimate to say that in Trinidad. We don't have that culture. Other countries have that culture. Other countries have a culture where they will say, let's all get the Hutus, let's all get the Tutsis. People will say that that's barbaric. We do not agree with it. However, there are these undercurrents, there are these other things that people manipulate, and that is absolutely true. And I totally.
But we can see, like Kirk, and Mr. Montano could weigh in as well, is that we saw what happened under the apartheid system, where it wasn't a part of like a constitution of South Africa, but there were policies that was put in by the South African government that
but it was constitutional in South Africa.
Yes,
but white people could only go here, black people could only go here.
But with respect to both of you, you're missing my point, which is, Kirk, I happen to agree with you, but I've lived in this country now for 3,873 years.
You're right. Okay.
Okay, I lied. 3,894.
I thought you were going to say days,
right.
Minutes or
but I've lived here a long time.
That's right.
And the truth is that at the end of the day, you scratch an Indian, he will be voting UNC. You scratch an African, he will be voting PNM. And never the twain shall meet.
But again, I need to challenge you on this, though. Eh? We have Jerlene John, we have Wade Mark, we have Sean Sobers. We when you go to our Monday night meetings on the ground,
and how many Africans are Jerlene and Wade?
Yeah, no, I did not say that the majority.
No,
I mean, it's an observational truth that yes, more.
Right.
But
now, my point being, look, PNM has a bedrock of approximately 30% of the population. UNC has a bedrock of approximately another 30%. Right. Approximately 15% of the population leans towards PNM, and approximately 15% leans towards UNC. Well, that leaves you with about 15-20%. I've now lost track of my numbers.
But the general idea.
It leaves you with about 10 or 15%, of which I classify as the non-Black, non-Indian, and willing to vote for whoever they think is best. In a very tight election, the nons will have the sway, and that is where the marginal constituencies come in.
I have to also challenge you on that. I think it is not fair to Indian people who vote for the UNC or African people who vote for the PNM that they are somehow mindless, but Indians who vote for the PNM or Africans who vote for the UNC are ones with intelligence. And there are fanatic Indians who will not vote for UNC and only vote for PNM, and vice versa. There are fanatic Afro-UNC supporters. I know both on both sides. And these exist. They're a minority, right? But they do exist. And I don't think it's fair to label somebody mindless if they happen to be Afro and voting for the PNM or Indo.
I know some very intelligent people on both sides of the divide, who at the end of the day, no matter what, they are not going to vote for X, whoever X is.
That is absolutely true as well.
They're only voting for Y, again, whoever Y is.
Which brings me back. I'm not saying
which brings me back to my point. Which brings me back to my point, which is, let us change the Constitution so we make it easier for Mr. A to vote for X party, or Mr. B to vote for Y party, as the case may be.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, he will only have, he will feel that he has to get rid of Mr. M, who is a total waste of time.
It's almost like an SEA exam, isn't it? It's like where everything is on one thing, and instead you space it out into a number of elections.
No, except for, let me put it to you this way.
Yeah.
In terms of policies, there is very little difference between the parties.
I would disagree on that strongly.
No, I don't know. We're talking of policies.
Yes.
We're not talking about execution of those policies, because I happen to think that the PNM is bloody awful in its execution. But I also think that some of the things that they stand for theoretically are good. In theory, the PNM is for equality. In theory. In practice, they are not. In theory, the PNM is about economic opportunity for all. In practice, they are not. In theory, the PNM is anti-discrimination. In practice, they are not. And I could go on and on and on.
In theory, the PNM are for more government centralization, and the UNC, in theory and practice, are for more decentralization, for more empowerment of people as opposed to empowerment of the state, for example. I would also say that, that the PNM's economic policies similarly are very much state-driven as opposed to the UNC, which is far more people and private sector driven.
Well,
it's small private sector, small and middle. I would also say the PNM is biased towards the power of the state and say things like sedition laws, whereas the UNC has always stood far more for people's human and civil and individual rights, which is why things like the Equal Opportunities Commission, the Freedom of Information Act, the JSCs, the Judicial Review, these are all UNC initiatives. The PNM are totally against it.
You make a good
because there are
point.
different philosophies. So I cannot accept that the two parties have the same philosophy. They don't. I don't believe it's just a matter of execution.
Philosophy.
I believe the
on
PNM
major
have a
issues,
very different view.
I don't agree with that. Certainly, from what I've seen of their performances, of all the different parties, what I've seen of their performances, I've not seen any great differences. But you can test it. You can test what I'm saying another way. Mm-hmm. Go and ask the ordinary person, what is the real difference between PNM and UNC? And you'll probably get an answer. They're all the same breed of dog. Now, what we need is to change that perception. And in order to change that perception, we need to come back to a constitution that allows us to change that perception. And
I
we
totally
don't have that right now. Because to go back to what Brian was saying, for example, about the misbehavior, or let me use the word, the perceived misbehavior of the former Attorney General. Let us go back to what Brian was saying about the Police Service Commission. Let us go back and their home to the question of the appointment of a commissioner of police. All of these things, we need begin and end with a system of government which is fairer than what we have now, because what we have now, the system that we have now, is not as fair as it could be or should be. And Agreed. That is where I am saying that our discussion should be.
Exactly. And I think we can all agree with that. But Brian, let me bring you in on the conversation, because I think you dropped out for a while.
No, I was more listening, because okay. I like to first before I say something. And I mean, it is, I share the views. We see, but we must also understand that our constitution is something that must be held sacred. Because I would quote the great Mahatma when he made it quite clear that when we want to form laws, we must ensure that laws are done properly, where that persons are not subjected to any part of that law that can cause them to feel, taken advantage of, right? Because laws must be there to govern, yes, but must be governed properly as well as fairly. And we must have fairness in the law as well, right? I mean, we must look, for me, the major issue that we looked at the issue of the Police Service Commission and the way it was acted, where you have a prime minister who came out of nowhere, stopped in blue and say, hey, this ain't looking good. And then when pressed upon it for months, I never was a part of that. I never had anything to do with that. And then you waited 3 months after to come and say, well, it was me. But the prime minister has to understand that you breached constitutional.
You realize that what you're really criticizing, you're criticizing the press, the media, who does not pick up on this and who does not report that the prime minister is a liar.
Yeah.
We see now, if we talk about the media, that's a whole different kata.
Now, I want to put up. I want to challenge you, Brian, on something there, and then put that to Robin to comment on. But this idea of seeing the Constitution as sacred, I want to say this: the rule of law, I think, should be seen as sacred because that's a fundamental principle. Are we going to live by the rule of man, which means the powerful, or the rule of law, which means a fair system of rules that we agree on? And yes, I just want to. So the idea of now the sacredness of our particular constitution, that's a concept borrowed from the United States, where they have a particular reverence for our founders. Our particular constitution, if you look at the way it was, if you understand the history of how we got it, was a creature of Eric Williams and Ellis Clark, who rammed it down the throats of this country that did not want it, right? That had many, many amendments, that had many other suggestions that were ignored. And Williams brought back some of the worst aspects of colonial rule into independence, which the Gomes government before him, which has been written out of history, right? But they had put all those things out. We had a much more progressive constitution in 1950, while we were a British colony, because the legislature could have had to vote in the ministers, and they had the power to vote out a minister. Williams didn't like that, and he couldn't care less what the other people thought. He took that out. So to consider that sacred, I don't see that we have any obligation to consider that piece of political PNM-ism as sacred. I think he perverted our constitutional development, and I mean, I'm a constitutional scholar, so I've looked at that, in great detail. But I do absolutely agree that we must be governed by the rule of law. But our constitution, for instance, let's take this police service commission. How is this idea of the parliament vetting the list was because of a UNC amendment, right? Because under the PNM constitution, the prime minister had veto. I don't know if you remember all the way back the standoff between Kenneth Lala and Prime Minister Manning over the police service commission. That was ongoing for many years in the 90s. Right? That was the constitution. And to me, what it seems like is that the PNM want to go back to the old PNM constitution, but the UNC has been struggling throughout its existence to put in things like the judicial, the JSC, the Joint Select Committees, to put in things like Freedom of Information Acts, equality, equal opportunities legislation, judicial review, all things that the PNM hate, and when they are in government, they try to suppress and they try to make as if those laws don't exist, right? But the Constitution must be a product of our struggle for a more democratic constitution, and in that respect, I think this is what Robin Montano is suggesting with his radical reform there. But let me ask you to come in here, Robin.
Mr. Montano comes in is that we must understand, yes, we have to have the rule of law, but we must also understand that for the rule of law to operate, it must reign supreme, right? It must remain supreme, in which that you must also have a proper balance in the law, right? Because you can't have a prime minister coming out of nowhere, going where he was hiding in the garden, he was hiding in the bushes, just waiting for her to just, and then jump on board, boo, hey, maybe I'm being like Mr. Montano here a little bit, right? Just to say, hey, give me that list now, give me it now. You know what, I ain't like this, take it back and go home with it, right? No, it can't happen, because the parliament was created in a way in that the list would go to the president, and then the president would go through the list and then send it to the parliament. Yes, the veto was removed when Mr. Manning got the pressure from it as well. And then the UNC government made sure and ensured that that was done properly. So
but the list never had to go to Parliament before. That's a new introduction.
No, it was because the Prime Minister then had the veto to say, hey, I don't like this name, it goes.
But it never went to Parliament. That was something Kamala Prasad Bissessar herself put in.
So we have to make sure of that. So Dr. Rowley, if he had an issue with Kirk Mago, name on the list, if I use you as an example, he comes to the Parliament and says, listen, Kirk Mago is a man that's going to walk in the street. He's walking dog at 2 o'clock in the morning and he's be annoying everybody in the road, right? Just to be as
But the PLM are used to autocracy, and that's what they want. And
so
that's the kind of constitution they like. And that's a governance they like.
The line. The Prime Minister has crossed that line. And then also with the same Police Service Commission, we saw even with that, but even just the appointment of these persons, how it was being done. Remember, you have that recommendations from the opposition, recommendations from the Prime Minister. And then you have a president who is also governed by the Constitution. She had the right to speak on this because the Prime Minister, yes, goes to the President's house or President's residence or office of the President. He doesn't just come like Mumford the magician and appear. No, there has to have an official record of the Prime Minister coming.
Let's bring in Robin again on the discussion here. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Brian, let me just ask you something, which is really going back to my original point, which was and is that we need a complete rewrite of the Constitution. Why do we have a president in its present form, a presidency in its present form? The president is the head of state, and of course, if at the moment it's a woman, and so I will say she. If she walks in the room, I will stand up out of respect, not only for her gender, but more for respect of the office that she holds. But my opinion of the person who is the president might be very low. And I would not stand for her if tomorrow morning she ceases to be president. So let me ask you this: why do we have a president? A president costs us a lot of money, several $1 million a year. Why? Having said that, if you made me president in the morning, I would accept it immediately. I wouldn't have to wait for this afternoon. It's the sweetest job in the world. But seriously, why do we have a president?
Well, you see,
surely the head of state should be elected. Surely the head of state should have certain constitutional parameters from which he or she has to work with. And surely I agree with you that our Constitution ought to be supreme. And I also agree from your innuendo or inference that this government and this Prime Minister has been subverting the Constitution. But that is a different issue. What we're here to discuss is not the apparent subversion of the Constitution, but what are the issues? You ever want to understand a problem, go back to basics. I have decided that in order to fix it, I've started with a blank sheet of paper. I urge you to do the same. Start with a blank sheet of paper and go back and ask yourself the appropriate questions. For example, I asked the question early on in this debate, why do we have a city council and a village council and a district council and a Tobago House of Assembly? Why? When the mayor of Miami, for crying out loud, presides over a larger land area and more money than the whole of Trinidad and Tobago has. So why do we need this thing divided up the way it is? Isn't our present constitution encouraging division? Can we devise another system that brings us together? I have made a suggestion, and I'm not wedded to the suggestion that I'll feel, oh, I'm so vexed because you didn't accept what I'm saying. Just come up with a better one. Come with an idea which you think will help heal the divisions. We are the leaders in the society, and well, I'm the leader from yesterday. You're the leader for today and maybe tomorrow. But we need to be thinking in terms of our society. What is in the best interests of the society? How can we bring everybody together? I'm not about, at this stage in my life, which is 4,865 years,
Much time has
I'm not
elapsed.
about, okay, I know I'm growing older by the minute. But I'm not about, oh, you are worse, this side is worse than that side and so on. I'm about how to fix things. How can we fix things so that the country works better? We certainly can't fix it with this constitution that we have. This constitution allows for babble. This constitution encourages division. This constitution does everything wrong, and everything that you're complaining about comes right back to this constitution. So
and I might even go so far as to say by design in the constitution.
Of course, Eric Williams designed this. Well, Eric Williams and Ellis Clark designed this constitution so that Williams, would have absolute power. I understand that, but
So, you see,
Williams is long gone now, and
but
now
his legacy remains in that constitution.
Yeah, now we need to think very carefully and very clearly what is in the best interest of Trinidad and Tobago. As I say, I have made a suggestion. I think it's a good suggestion, but if you don't like it, then fine. Come out with another one.
you see, in
But
addition
fix
to that,
it.
Mr. Montano would have asked, why do we have a president? Now, we must understand as well, Mr. Montano, and I'm sure you would agree with me, that due to our Westminster style of system, our head of state basically mirrors that of the British system, where we have, where the British would have the Queen, which she is the head of state, but we have a president. But our president is elected different in the means of through the parliament system. Now, I understand where you're coming from by way and that a president can be elected. Now, we must never forget that then Prime Minister, Mr. Manning, wanted to bring in the style of that of an executive president. But his style of executive president was allowing full form of autocratic form of rule. And I believe I'm not mistaken, you would have sat in the Senate when those ideas were being trashed out by Mr. Manning, in which he had already started showing ways of it.
And to be fair, I disagreed fundamentally with what he was proposing. Having said that, I'm not opposed to an executive type president, but there are all types of executive presidents, ranging from Vladimir Putin to Joe Biden, and just about everything in between. So that we have to look. What I'm saying is, look and see what you want. Start with a clean sheet of paper, and deal with what you want. And deal with how do we control a president? What powers do we give him? What checks and balances do we put on him? Or do we just let him run rampant? Because right now, whether you like it or not, a prime minister, whether it's a UNC, PNM, or ABC prime minister, is really God Almighty, at least for the 5 years.
Well, in addition to that, we must also remember that our president has the prerogative powers of how the crown would have had it. But we've only had one president in our history who ever looked at using the prerogative powers was during when there was the political turmoil in Haiti. in which our defense force was being used to go to Haiti, and the then president of Trinidad and Tobago, if I'm not mistaken, would have been Nur Hassan Ali. He came out and had to stop the then Minister of National Security by saying, listen, the armed forces fall under the head of state. You have not come and consulted with me concerning the deployment of the armed forces, which led to the then Minister of National Security and the Prime Minister then had to go and meet with the president to literally stop that whole impasse from happening, because there was a CARICOM decision where CARICOM heads of states, or head of government, I should say rather, had agreed to go and assist Haiti. But
well, in my view, in my personal view, Brian, Nur Hassan Ali stands head and shoulders above every other president that we've had.
I agree.
I think he was the best president that we've had. I had a lot of time for him. Unfortunately, he's dead now, poor fellow. But I did think that he was the best that we had.
And I want to add another conceptual point, although we should be wrapping up, but there is a point that
Can you print
that in my analysis of our constitution development in Trinidad and Tobago and around the world, culture is very important, because you can tell people you're free and you have and nobody can tell you what to do. You have God-given rights. But if you come from a culture of slavery or indenture where Massa had all the rights and you had none, there'd still be this cultural way of being of secrecy, of being submissive to authority, even though in law you have rights to do X, Y, or Z. And then also, even though in law a prime minister or an authority or a police officer or a minister or whatever may be circumscribed by law, but the culture is, well, I'm the big man and whatever I say goes. You just listen. And then the person below just listens, even though all of that is contrary to law. But this happens so much in this country because the culture of authoritarianism exists in a way that is come from our history as opposed to the law. And so sometimes we put in laws that are great laws on paper, amazing laws on paper. But when we execute it, we have some bad habits from the past. Yeah. What do you all say?
We have also seen where the breach of separation of powers has been happening, where we saw a prime minister come to interfere with a process that should have come to the parliament. We've also seen, and we must talk about this, is the literal interference of an attorney general from what he did to Mr. McIntyre, the CPC, Chief Parliamentary Counsel, in which I have had the privilege of working with Mr. McIntyre at my time at the Attorney General's office, right? That Mr. McIntyre knows that the CPC's office, who came into volition from being when we retained independence, when we got independence, when we achieved independence, right? And that the practice direction is that legislation must come from the cabinet once approved, or from the prime minister. It then comes to the CPC, either from the line ministries to come from, or from the prime minister, or from that even of the attorney general, once approved by cabinet. You came as attorney general, you came and said, listen, I want you to deal with this piece of legislation here, which was under the Ministry of National Security, where you have an attorney general, again, usurping his own colleague. And yet the CPC, who was Mr. McIntyre, had to tell the attorney general, pal, you're a little out of your own border here. You can't tell me to do that. Where it even led to the legal officers.
But Brian, you're absolutely right. But all roads lead to Rome. We need to fix the Constitution.
I agree. Wait, let me just finish the point. In that, we even saw where the clerk of the house, Miss Jackie, got involved, where he sent it to her, bypassed everybody, sent it to her. And Miss Jackie had to jump in and said, Mr. Attorney General, take this back. You can't bring it to me. So yes, I agree the Constitution can make some changes there. But at the end of the day, you have a public officer who's also a senior counsel as well. He's one of the three public officers who was made senior counsel. The other one was the DPP in that year of 2012. And the senior
so
public
in other
officer.
words, you're saying that the existing Constitution, even if it may have flaws, has some important provisions in it, which are even being flouted.
Which are being flouted. And that
which makes it worse, yeah. So there is sort of a constitutional change.
Just to put a little postscript onto Brian's point, Kirk.
Yeah.
It is interesting that the new Attorney General, who can deal with this matter very quickly and very easily, has not dealt with it.
Correct.
But isn't that interesting?
What he has done is that he has done the literal, how to say it, what the literal PNM Attorney General would do, where he gave it out to Douglas Mendes Senior Counsel as well as to Mr. Kwamena, two known persons who get speech under the People's National Movement. So
but you don't need any big set of advice, because it's either you are right, which I think you are, or you're wrong, which I don't think you are.
But in addition to Mr. Montano, the Attorney General currently, Mr. Reginald Almore, Senior Counsel, one of his fortes is in administrative law, because he has been constantly being used by Attorney General Faris Alwari, Attorney General Glenda Moraine, Attorney General John Jeremy, Senior Counsel. And if you follow the trend where I'm going, and he was always being used for administrative law matters which his state took on. So he should have been the best person to even realize, well, this letter to the JLSC by the then Attorney General Faris Alwari is not worth the paper it's written on, and reinstate the man. Because I don't know if Mr. Montano, if you ever dealt with Mr. McIntyre. Mr. McIntyre.
No, I pass him in the street. I don't know him. But you see, let me put it to you like this. One, I think that you are absolutely right. Two, I just wanted to say that I found it interesting that Mr. Amor has not dealt with the matter yet. In fact, the fact that he hasn't dealt with it raises most ugly and most unnecessary suspicions about his, how he intends to run his ministry.
Well, his man will be
very ugly and most unnecessary.
Well, his
suspicions, but and we can't say more than that at the moment. That Faris Alwari was an absolute disaster. I agree with that. But Faris lasted 7 years. Question, and now again, I have very ugly and most unnecessary suspicions as to why he lasted so long, which we can't say publicly here. But he did last. Why? What happened? Why did the Prime Minister demote him so suddenly?
And that's the next thing.
We're coming to the end, and we should wrap up. But let me just summarize it and then ask you to give some closing remarks, both of you, which is that it appears, well, Brian has identified clear abuses of authority, clear breaches that this government has been, and the Prime Minister in particular, also the Attorney General, has been committing over and over again. And we need to be very vigilant about enforcing these provisions of the Constitution and so forth. And then Mr. Montano has agreed with that, but has gone further to say that this is not just a matter of particular instances that we have to defend, although we do have to defend them, but that there's wider constitutional reform, radical, starting with a blank sheet of paper that needs to be done. So that's what I understand basically the two positions to be. And it's time to wrap up. We would never be able to resolve everything in a short discussion like this. But I'd like the both of you to give closing remarks first. Let me invite Mr. Montano first. Was my summary accurate, and how would you correct it or close it off? Could you hear?
Sorry, what was that? You are asking me something?
Right. Yes. I was asking you whether my summary was accurate, and if not, how would you correct it, or how would you sum it up for the audience?
No, I think that you're accurate, and the only thing that I would say, I'll go right back to the beginning. We need, if you have a problem and you want to understand it, always go back to the basics, go back to the beginning. What is our biggest problem? What is our basic problem? Answer: race. Deal with it. Once you've dealt with it, everything, you will find everything else will flow. And Brian, all I have to say to you is that I agree with you. There's nothing that you have said this evening that I have found objectionable. In fact, what is the opposite of objectionable?
Agreeable.
I'm sorry. Sometimes I get myself confused.
You're in agreement.
I can't think of the right words, but you know what I mean. I'm praising you. I'm not criticizing you, and so on. In fact, the very mild criticism that I would make is that you have tended this evening to focus on small issues that have arisen because of the big issue of a faulty constitution. Scrap the whole constitution, start with a clean slate and go forward. I have given you one idea. I don't hold fast to this idea and say that it's the greatest idea. I think it's a good idea. Otherwise, I wouldn't have put it forward. But, you come up with your own version. I don't like the Westminster system particularly. I think that it tends to lead to dictatorship, even if it's only for a dictatorship of 5 years. I don't like it. But you know what? If you like it, go with it. But give me a solution to the problem, the big problem. Bring us together. That is what we need to have done. Once we can come together, everything else flows.
Well, thanks very much for that. And Brian, your closing remarks.
Well,
did I summarize it properly?
Yes, you did. Let me just say, first of all, it's an honor to have a gentleman again like Robert Montano agree with me. I have in my junior times as an attorney, even though I'm admitted for 10 years, when I now start, I've listened to Mr. Montano and many times in the court. So, it is an honor. I will say this, that our constitution, it's not perfect. However, what we have right now is what we have to work with. I do believe we have to make some changes. The United National Congress in its times in government, and the first time under Mr. Pannel, and its second time under Kamala Prasad predecessor under the People's Partnership, a lot of changes was brought to the Constitution. We would remember that under the Kamala Prasad predecessor's administration, we were looking at bringing a lot of changes to the Constitution, especially with the issue of the one-term Prime Minister. We also were looking at the issues of changes. One such changes we did was in local government, where we brought in the change of how an alderman is elected, where it's not by, who picked one. No, it came in under a proportional representation system. And that is how there are many councils today that has an alderman that would have never had an alderman before on either side of the political fence. Again, we must also understand that the persons who we put in charge is supposed to ensure the Constitution does not be trampled upon. And if those persons trample upon the Constitution or even those same laws, then who are you and who am I? That is why I just to use my closing points with just the issue of that's illegal spying, and I'm calling it illegal spying.
Yes, it is.
Because of the breaches of
Brian,
our
let me interrupt you here. When Mrs. Prasad Bisesa first became Prime Minister, she announced that several people were had been spied on illegally. My name was amongst the 100 or more people that were spied on. Ever since then, I've been very careful to make sure that whatever I have to say, it either can be said publicly or it has to be said under very controlled circumstances.
Maybe Mr. Montano is reading my notes, because I had it yesterday that the one of those persons who was being spied upon was indeed Robert Montano, and even his brother was also being spied upon. His own brother was also being spied upon. I mean, just to say, our Constitution sections 4, 5, and 6 withholds our fundamental rights. One such right is the freedom of speech, and also the right of privacy. And I said it once, when the government was looking to come and deal with that by take away that right to privacy, I will be the first man to come with the Constitution copy that I have in my office, and I'll burn it in front of either the Hall of Justice or the Parliament. Because when you have a government who is taking away rights from you, then you're no longer a democratic government. You are autocratic, you are a dictator, you are authoritarian form of government. And I will finally say this, that Faris Arawi, as far as I'm concerned, by showing what he can do by bringing breaches in law, ought not to even hold a cabinet position. This man shouldn't even be a parliamentary secretary, because if he can do that in the office of the Attorney General, I can only imagine what he can do as Minister of Local Government, and I've worked in local government for years. I was a corp second 2 corporations. What is stopping him as Minister of Local Government going to a chairman or a mayor that he controls and say, listen, I want your council to not vote on this. I want your council to make sure that this doesn't happen. Or we have also got local government reform coming. He is in charge of that. He has legal officers now who is not the CPC, who has to now hope that they keep their jobs. So if you come and say, I want this section removed, I want this section removed, they have no choice to say, okay, minister, we will do it. They can't disagree with them, because knowing how Faris Arawi is, having worked at the office of the Attorney General, he'll move them. I'm not saying he moved me, but I moved as legal counsel to the Attorney General to the Intellectual Property Office. Just saying. So I will close by saying this. Our Constitution, whether bad, indifferent, or good, it is the Constitution of the land. It must be protected at all forms. It must not be trampled upon. I do agree we do need lots of changes in the Constitution, but the persons who are put to preserve it, to protect it, to enforce it, tramples on it, they must go. Dr. Mego, again, I do thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to be in these type of panels with you, because at the end of the day, we have to know that the people of this country must understand our country is in a dire constitutional crisis, and they must know why we are in a constitutional crisis and how we must solve it. If I may just dare say it, it is United National Congress who can solve that problem. I thank you, and thank you for having me.
Well, I want to thank both of you, Mr. Robert Montano and Mr. Brian Baig. I think it was a very enlightening and interesting discussion, and I'm sure our viewers also felt the same way and would have also been so enriched. So thanks again so much. And to our viewers, I want to thank you for looking and listening, and watch out for the next issue of the checklist, which will be coming out very shortly. So thanks again. Have a good night.